Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Commercial Property Investor Podcast, where it's my job to introduce you to people from the world of commercial property. We're talking with investors and thought leaders about their experiences of the commercial property world and sharing our own lessons from the last 20 years to give you practical know-how so that you can follow in their footsteps. If you've ever thought commercial could be your next step, but it just seems too confusing and opaque, then you've come to the right place. There are so many exciting opportunities in this dynamic sector, and I'm looking forward to pulling back the curtain and sharing them with you.
Doing the carbon scopes it's a bigger thing, and there's a lot more to it. And yeah, I'm excited really to get it out there and see what we can do to make things better.
Welcome back to the Commercial Property Investor Podcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm down in London with Georgia.
Hiya.
Hi, Georgia. Thanks for joining me. You work with Office Space in Town, and we just recently had Niki Fuchs on the podcast. And you and I are going to talk more about your role in this business based around ESG.
Yeah.
But before we dive into that, maybe we should just give a little bit of context for the audience of how you got involved in this business.
Yeah.
And what your day-to-day role is now.
Okay, so I started with Office Space in Town in 2011. So when I was just a baby.
Wow.
I know, when we were just starting out in Euston as well. So we just had one building.
Yep.
And obviously it was Nikki and Giles, brother and sister. So there was already this kind of family ethos that I bought into. And yes, I've just kind of had every single job you could think of. So from receptionist to conferencing to operations to where I am now, which is Operations and ESG Director. So yeah, kind of having all those roles meant I kind of got really deep understanding of how the business runs and all kind of aspects of it. And then the ESG part, for me, I think Nikki and Giles both knew from the very beginning that I had this fascination with the natural world. Yep. And I've always tried to do as much as I can personally for kind of sustainability side. So having the opportunity to step into a ESG director role was probably, for me, my best career day that I've ever had. Because it kind of means I can combine my passion with work. So yeah, that's how I've kind of ended up here.
Wow, 2000, so 12 years ago?
12 years, yeah.
Yeah, you can learn a lot in 12 years, right?
Yeah, and obviously the business has grown as I've grown with it, so it's been amazing.
I get the impression though that the business, the way it started out, is almost the same now in terms of the ethos, the customer experience. It seems like from day one that was the goal.
Well, I think, so building the ESG policy, there was quite a lot that was already in the foundations, particularly around kind of the social side, so the people side. And lots of charity work was already being done and kind of investment into the OSiT staff. So it was just really building on those really good values.
So you've got a title there that has two key elements to it, right? Mm-hmm. ESG Director and Operations.
Yeah.
And on one side of the coin, you might say, well, actually, they really should be integrated, of course. But on the other side of the coin, people may say, oh, you've just had ESG stuck on the end of your title there.
Yeah.
What would you say to those people?
I think it definitely works together, because kind of all the decisions that need to be made to make those changes are from an operational side, particularly in our industry. A lot of it is to do with the assets, the buildings, and making buildings more efficient and things like that. And also the people side, the HR side, is also down to operations. So that I would say to those people that they're wrong. But I completely get it. I mean, ESG, it could be a whole role in itself, of course, because it's so big. But I was fortunate enough to be able to gather a group of people called my green team. So there's a big group of people in OSiT that volunteered to join, so they help with those efforts.
Champions.
Yeah, they are.
Right, so it's interesting because we have to remember that OSiT own their own buildings, so you've got much more control over what's going on, whereas if you're leasing space with a landlord, you're almost becoming the customer asking for these sorts of changes, right?
Exactly.
But if you are running and owning the buildings, you've got this ability to think more longer term and invest longer term. But I have to make sure that I'm not just talking to you about energy and environment, because the social and the governance side is also key to what goes on.
Yeah.
And if they were separate, you can see that those two individuals might actually be a little bit at loggerhead.
Yeah.
But now you just have to fight with yourself, right?
Exactly.
About making those changes.
Yeah.
So what are the key things that started this process? Was it customers asking? When did the title come about?
So really, it came about from Niki recognising that I was really passionate about this, and I was trying to make as much impact as I could before I got the role in this kind of area. And then this is back when ESG wasn't really a word. It was CSR, corporate social responsibility. Yes. So actually my first ever proposal to become CSR director, I created a CSR policy. And then the terminology changed because CSR became kind of, it sounds like an obligation, a bit of a tick box, and was quite vague in the sense it was just social responsibility. So I had to change it to ESG, and actually changing it to ESG made it simpler because it really does, it puts it into 3 categories, but they're three really important categories that, you have your focus, but you do bring it all together in a way. So that's how it first came about. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about energy for starters, right? And obviously we've had a bit of an issue with energy over the last couple of years, right? Mm-hmm. Pricing has changed, and some people run out their contracts and things. What were the low hanging fruit that you were able to deal with when you started taking on the role? And I appreciate that there's also that element of, right, well, there's existing stock that we have that we've already fitted out, and we've already spent quite a lot of money on that fit out. And then there's new buildings or second-hand buildings, whichever we want to look at, that are coming into the portfolio, and then, right, okay, now we've got a bit of a cleaner slate.
Yeah.
So how have you approached those two, particularly the existing stock?
Yeah. So I think I would advise anyone to go down this route as well. So we got advice. So we got energy audits for all of the buildings. That was the first one we did, was about 6 years ago. Yep. And then we've recently just had them redone. And those energy audits are like a real thorough analysis of everything, of how your building operates. So with that, they can show you your easy wins. So changes to heating and cooling, temperatures, timings, things like that. And then they show you the bigger scale kind of improvements that you can make. And from that gives you a really clear kind of map as to what you should be putting into your building development plans, and particularly owning the buildings. You want to make them as efficient as possible. You want to, continue to reinvest into it, which we do constantly. We're doing refurbs. So it's tying in, along with those refurbs, it's tying in, changes to make it more efficient. So our older stock, for example, we've now got LED lighting throughout all of them. Whereas before, back in the day, they were normal lighting. We have always had PIR, which is great. But again, motion sensors is great. But it's constantly changing. I'm quite excited about the tech that's coming out that will really enhance the buildings and understanding the buildings. I was listening to a talk the other day actually by, it was Realcom on YouTube, and they showed that in the pandemic in New York, occupancy dropped by 90%, but energy only dropped by 10 to 15%, so wow. Exactly. So even if people aren't using it, the buildings are still using the same amount of energy. So having tech that really understands where people are in the building, when they're in the building, and then making the adjustments, turning off things where it can be turned off, etc. I mean, we're doing what we can in terms of the energy audits, but it will keep changing as tech gets better and better. So
here's a question for you.
Yeah.
There is, at the end of the day, we're in a business, right? And I do say sometimes that the only way to be zero is to stay at home and do nothing, right? And even that uses energy.
Yeah.
But when the business is making decisions about, so you get your report and you have a look at all the different recommendations, and some of them are maybe a little bit more costly than others.
Yeah.
Some of them, the ROI, the return is much quicker.
Yeah.
Is there a cut-off, and I'm sure there probably isn't specifically, but what I'm trying to get to is you might have a recommendation that it takes 6 years for this thing to repay back. It might take 8 years for this one, it might be 3 years, right? Yeah. It's a no-brainer. Is there must be a point where you're making financial decisions as well as environmental decisions, and those two fight against each other. So
of course.
How do you reconcile that?
Well, I think for businesses in their ESG kind of strategy to kind of say, I'm going to bring everything to the board so that we can make decisions that, impact people and planet over profit sometimes. But obviously, you have to make profit as well. So that's where you do need people. So you can't just give an energy audit to someone and say, these are recommendations, and someone goes, oh, we'll do them all. You have to have people in the business that really understand the business, understand where they can spend money, what timings would be right to do it. Yep. We have, for example, one of the recommendations is solar panels at one of our buildings. And actually, on that building, the payback, it wasn't worth it because it would only get a certain amount of sun in this point. We can only put a certain amount there. But then in other buildings, it does. So it's like you really have to analyse what you're going to benefit from. And with it, it's not just about reducing energy for cost. It's obviously for the planet as well, but sure. And it's also to help decarbonize your buildings. So in the long run, that's where the value is going to come, because there's tighter regulations coming into play, and investors are looking at making investments into
yes, slightly less tangible, not necessarily just money.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
but yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky.
There's a tricky balance there, isn't there? And with the whole element of generating your own, there are some buildings just not really, like you say, it's just not feasible. And it'd be interesting if in time the grid allows us to do it somewhere else, to generate energy somewhere else, and then use it ourselves in another location. But at the moment, it's just too disjointed, isn't it, for that to happen?
Well, I mean, that would be the pivotal point, because solar and wind, it's not constantly creating energy. So that's where the big focus needs to be from the government, really, is to make these big storage.
There's only so much we can do to make things work better, and then eventually there's a part there. I was discussing this with Alison from Edinburgh. Just there is a part there that's maybe not totally transparent right now, which is that actually the grid needs to be green for us to be able to get to targets at 2050, right?
Exactly.
Where we're getting to net zero, and there are certain elements that unless we shut down, that we're going to be producing.
Yeah.
Have you done a benchmark then? So you talked about having the buildings looked at. Have you now got a bench, or when was the date of the benchmark of, right, okay, as a business we're producing 5 tons of carbon?
No. So with us, there was a big, everyone was doing net zero pledges about 2 years ago, and it was, we're going to be net zero by 2030, but with no tangible plans of how to get there. And I remember the marketing team saying to me, come on, we need to get a plan.
We need one.
And I said, no, we can't right now. We have to do it the right way. We have to be really transparent and honest. And for us, this is where the Planet Mark partnership that we've recently got. So they're a sustainability accreditation, but they basically track and measure all kind of scopes of your carbon. From there, we can then make a really kind of tangible plan. But for me, it's more about, like I said, accountability, transparency, showing where we might not be doing so well, where we look to improve, rather than just kind of slapping out a pledge. The government has its own 2050, which is everyone kind of will have to contribute towards that. But at this moment in time, it's, for me, we're in the journey right now. And we'll figure it out from there if we want to set a real date or if we want to set year-on-year targets.
Yes. So do you have a benchmark yet of your total consumption?
No. So that's what...
Because you're looking at scope 2 and 3?
And 3, yes.
So that's much more difficult to measure, right?
So we should actually have, in the next couple of weeks, we've finished our assessment. And once we've got that, I'll be sharing it, and it will be, out there for everyone to see. But until then, no.
Yeah, and then it's really not being overwhelmed with it all. It's doing 10% a year or whatever it is.
Exactly.
And obviously with the first few years, one hopes that there's some easy wins,
Yeah.
albeit it sounds like you've been pretty diligent on that front already.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been kind of doing reporting and measuring for years, and before that we've done kind of BREEAM in use assessments and things like that, and we've always been, tracking our variances in consumption data. But doing the carbon scopes it's a bigger thing, and there's a lot more to it. And yeah, I'm excited really to get it out there and see what we can do to make things better.
Simon goes out and finds a new building. And I know every building's different, right? But is there any consensus at all in the business about what energy source we're going to start using? Or is that really going to be building dependent?
It's not building dependent, I suppose. I guess it's different if you're buying an old building or a new building. There's a lot more you can do. How efficient is it, etc. But I mean, as it stands, all of our energy contracts are renewable energy contracts already.
Right.
But are you talking more in terms of kind of solar panels and wind?
Yeah, solar, wind, gas.
Yeah.
Is gas off limits?
Yeah.
Air heat source, ground heat. All the various things that are out there that don't always completely close the loop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of our buildings now have no gas.
Yep.
So we've switched all to electric,
right.
which is the best practice that you can do. Gas is where you can avoid using it. So yes, in a new building, absolutely, we'd be going down that route. In terms of solar panels, as I said, it's all to do with the location of the building and how much space they have on the roof and things like that. But I'd be very keen to be exploring that.
Interesting.
And seeing a new building as an opportunity to really, think about every single piece of material you're using, really using sustainable timber and as much as recycled materials as possible, and locally sourced materials as well. Right. So I'm excited for Simon to get a new building.
Yeah, we love all that stuff. Yeah. And trying to use what's in the building as much as you can. Yeah. So if we just talk a little bit about the electrical stuff, that's interesting. So are you putting in air heat source pumps?
Yes.
A wet system or a dry system they're using?
Well, we've got a bit of a mixture, but mainly a dry system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Great. Yeah. Okay. And so that's already in place. Was there any buildings you actually had to go back into and change?
Yes. Yeah. So our two older buildings we had to, they had big old boilers. So and obviously there's a capex cost to changing it, but changing from gas to electric, it's quite quickly you see the payback. We've also got a couple of gyms that lease from us, and they are still on gas, and we're currently in the process of changing them over to electric as well, which when they have the full lease, you have to basically persuade people to do things, but we'll see a big benefit from them doing that as well.
Right, fab. Yeah. Okay, so that's the energy side. So let's talk a little bit about social and governance.
Yeah.
And then we're going to come back to maybe some of the other things that are driving this customer expectations stuff. So in terms of social, I haven't researched what the business has done in the past, but I'm pretty sure that Niki and Giles have often thought about the social element and their contribution to local areas that they're working in. But right now, what is the business doing about the social side? Yeah.
Well, I mean, social is all stakeholders really, isn't it? So
internal as well.
We firstly start with our wonderful employees. So creating a really fair, ethical company that gives them as much giving as much kind of private healthcare, well-being offerings, support, all things like that. Then it goes up to the clients, and obviously then all other shareholders that are a part of OSiT. And then there's it does feel like it should be a bit separate, but it's not, because everything is through social, and that's community.
Yeah.
And we've always done quite charitable stuff year on year. We used to always pick a nominated charity, and all of our efforts would go towards that charity, and the charity would be picked by someone within the business as well, so it's close to home. But this year we're actually doing it slightly differently. So each building in their geographical location have picked a local community cause. So we've got, for example, at our Liverpool Street building, they're contributing to Whitechapel missions. And this just gives us more of an opportunity to help in more ways than just money. So it's volunteering, time, and donations and things like that. We just kind of implemented a volunteer time off policy for the staff. So they get 20 hours a year paid in hours work, which they can go and volunteer. So so I'm quite excited. Everyone's quite excited as well because it's in their local community. It's easy to get to, but also there's more investment from the clients.
So have some staff already acted on that?
Yes.
Go on then, tell us some stories.
Yeah, so we've had Blackfriars where we're sat today. Theirs is the Everlink Community Store, which is a food bank. And they last week bought air fryers, lots of air fryers, and sent them over to there for them to give to the local community that are in need of it. We've got breakfast shifts at Bow Food Bank, and we've had lots of kind of drop-off donations. We've done a big drop-off to Hackney Food Bank as well. So and lots more to come.
Has anyone, because part of that is the trade-off with skills, isn't it? So there might be someone in the business that's particularly good at, I don't know, it may be about counselling, for instance, right? So actually that's the skill set they give during those 20 hours, or they might be particularly good at finance and that might help another. Have some of the staff been focusing in on that? Yeah,
well, I mean, our Waterloo cause is the fostering network. It's a big network to support foster carers and spread awareness within businesses about how they can be more flexible for when people want to take on foster children. And they've kind of been holding events there and also kind of talking to the general manager there and the ops manager there about how their advice on how to implement it into the buildings. So absolutely, there's a big mixed array of what we can offer, and it's an exciting time to be able to give the staff that freedom to do it. Also with the changes in the way people work, Mondays and Fridays are quite quiet at the moment. So it's a really great, it's great for us. So Mondays and Fridays are good days to go out and volunteer and really use the time well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So let's move on to governance.
Yes.
It's interesting that's part of your role as well.
Yeah.
Because that's not just about how staff or the business works with the community. It's also about how financially the business works. And how it performs, not just purely on a profit level.
Yeah.
It's a little bit about being transparent. So what changes has that brought about in the business? Yeah.
Well, I mean, people look at governance and they're like, oh gosh, that's so big and it's, a hard subject to get into. But if you think of the governance around the ESG, so your business will already have its own governance set out for its business. So the governance that I've brought in are around the decisions being made in terms of ESG.
Yep.
So it's changing kind of fiduciaries that you are going to be making decisions that put the planet and people before profit, or that that you've got strict policies on code of ethics, and that you're using suppliers that have been verified by you that follow that code of ethics and things like that. So, and green purchasing, things like that. So that's kind of the side of the governance that I've brought in. And it's that commitment to, we will consider absolutely everything that can kind of contribute to our ESG goals.
Yes, it's having it a bit more in the DNA.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's just circle back to a point that I can't bloody remember. I wanted to circle back to customers. Right.
Yes.
So let's just circle back to the customer experience, and in particular customer expectations. So you've been in the business for 11 years. You've dealt with customers, no doubt, every single day of that time.
Yeah.
How much have you seen the changes in the questions they're asking around ESG from maybe not very much at all? And is it now becoming something that everybody's asking for, a proportion of the customers? What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think more and more we're seeing people asking. So there's two things. So firstly, when people are coming to view our buildings before, buying into an office, they are pretty much most are asking for the ESG credentials, because they are not going to be able to reach their ESG goals, their own company ones, if they're in a building, if they're operating from a building that's not transparently measuring or, monitoring, their carbon or their energy and things like that. So at viewing sales stage, pretty much everyone.
Wow.
And then clients within the business, I think putting out our reports and our policy and things really kind of stirred up the engagement. So we had a lot of people kind of asking for advice of, where do we start? How can we get down this route? And obviously every business is different, but if you're, setting a good example, I think being really clear, making it simple basically, and saying like, this is what we're doing. These are kind of the transparent information that you would need to take away to create your own policies and things like that. That's what we're getting asked quite a lot.
Just get asked a lot, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember last year, Officer R&D's event, Simon mentioned that you guys had just got, I think it was a large there was a significant letting.
Yeah.
And he said, hand on heart, this is because when they asked us about ESG, we could tell them where we were at.
Yeah.
And that he felt that it was a differentiator now in the market. Do you see other competitors now starting to do the same? What's your...
Yeah, I think definitely. I think I've seen lots of flexible office providers put out their own ESG policies and things like that. And really, you have to. I mean, talking about the bigger companies like FTSE 500 companies and large enterprise companies, they'll have their own regulations that they have to report on. And that is all down to, as you mentioned earlier, I think before we were recording, but that they have to show their supply chain, and, if they're in
we're part of that.
And we're part of it. So that's kind of a must have. But then the smaller businesses, it's more about, okay, they might not have the resources to create their own policy or, have the manpower to really dig in. So they're able to kind of adopt ours a bit, because their office is where they are most of the time, let's say, and we're able to give them the information that they need to kind of set their own framework.
So I just want to ask you about the actual effect of this, because we've used the word policy a lot, and customers are asking for them, and maybe the slightly pessimistic within us would be saying, well, that sounds like another tick list.
Yeah.
What actually does it mean? Because it's all very well having lots of policies about everything, but does it actually make a difference? Yeah. So with customers, again, back to that coal face, where they're coming in and asking, are they just asking for policy and going away and saying, yeah, that's super? Or are they actually needing some better information about what's going on and what you're actually doing?
Yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, policies are there. Our initial ESG policy was just there to say, right, this is what we are committing to. Then year on year, we're doing our reports, our ESG annual reports, and it will always circle back to what we said we were going to commit to, what we have done, what we may not have been able to do, or improvements we need to make, and then our future commitments. So it's a constant kind of transparent report to show what we have done, what we will be doing type thing. Then, I mean, with that as well, all throughout the year, we're constantly putting out communications about, new initiatives, or, when we have, we're sharing our wins. And then we are also sharing, when we haven't done so well. So there is a constant communication about the action we're taking on the policy, because you're right. It's it can just be a tick list as well as all this greenwashing and everything like that. So another reason why I didn't want to put out the net zero pledge too early, because I don't want it to be a tick box. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and we as a business are really passionate about. So it's about actually making changes and actually doing what we feel is the right thing to do.
Right, okay. I want to come back to that newsletter thing and communicating with customers.
Mm-hmm.
But just before we get to that, I think there's that, everybody has the ability right now to put a policy out.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a year's time or 2 years' time is really when the rubber meets the road, because they're going to be asking back. Right, okay. So if somebody's listening and thinking, right, okay, what do I do about all this?
Yeah.
The first step is to get a benchmark, is to know where you are and how much carbon you're consuming or putting out there. And then with some recommendations is to start, as you say, tackling that on a bit by bit process and reporting back in.
Absolutely.
Effectively the way you see it.
Yeah. Step number 1, analyze your business. That's it. Yeah. And then from there, chunk it out.
And then start reporting back on that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to the customer side, because and it's difficult for me not to keep drifting back into energy and things. So it's one thing trying to change a lot of your kit and the tech and bringing in better building management. But ultimately, there is a part to be played by your own staff.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier on about your green team champions, which is a fantastic way of doing that, getting the buy-in, but also we have to get buy-in of customers. So the newsletter sounds like a great way of communicating and maybe starting to keep popping it up on the radar. But what other things are you doing for that side of the equation? Yeah,
so we have the green team and they're great. We've got pretty much one person in every building. So they're really enforcing kind of the strategy that I'm passing to them.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, you're right. The best thing that anyone can do is influence. Influence other people to do their own things outside of the business. I mean, we can control the building and what happens in the business, but if we can influence outside of it as well, the reach is massive. So we enrolled all staff on a carbon ambassadors course, and it's been great. I mean, they've been learning about what they can do personally. Yep. So you're at home, traveling into the office or whatever, eating seasonal foods and biking, things like that. And just to give that learning so that when they can then influence the people around them, they can influence the clients. And then with that, we've also been kind of drip feeding kind of information to clients. And then we also did a carbon clinics for clients. So they were able to come down and meet with Planet Mark. And Planet Mark would do kind of a quick assessment of their business and of how they can kind of make small changes that will bring their carbon footprint down.
Yeah. In the business, you've got this title and you've got this role. How much of your time, and it's maybe not a fair question, but how much of your time is orientated around the ESG?
That's a hard question.
Yeah, it's maybe not a fair question because they don't actually really separate out completely.
No.
But nevertheless, there must be times when you're like, right, today I need to get on with whatever, blah.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think every day there is, I'm doing something towards our ESG, and whether that's chatting with clients about it, or working towards projects that we've got on. Recently, we have had quite a lot, but that's because I really wanted to restructure the way we were measuring our energy and things like that. So, hard question. But I mean, if I could do it from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, I'd be very happy because I love it. But I also love the other side of my role as well. So, yeah.
So, but in the operations role, I mean, there's the team, right?
Yeah.
And I assume facilities management.
Yep.
Yep. So, talking to Niki earlier, the cleaning is in-house, or at least within the same brand. There's food and bev, right? And that's an operations nightmare on its own, right? So, and the team's not huge.
Yeah.
So how do you plan your time around all these different areas? Because some of them are quite diverse, right?
They are. I mean, day to day, I'm in a different building every day and I'm meeting with the operations people. We then have things called huddles, which I think they're so important. So they're bringing all of the operations people from the different buildings, having a meeting.
Physically or on
physically,
Teams?
Physically. We're an in-person company. Honestly, we haven't got used to Teams at all. because we weren't really at home. So, but yeah, and then having those huddles, it's a great way of, you know, getting them involved in it. And the operations guys are really involved because they do everything from facilities to organising the cleaning, etc., etc. So they have always got something.
Yeah.
They're always being instilled with the kind of ESG side of it.
So just on that structure thing. So this building we're in here, 22 Temple Street, what is the structure of the staffing here? Is there one person who looks after the building?
22 Tudor Street.
Tudor Street, sorry. Temple Street. We're near Temple.
Yeah.
We're
so we've got quite a flat management structure. So you have the board, then you have the general managers. And the general managers do everything from selling the building to account management to managing the teams on site. And then you have the operations managers who basically, they're our magic people, we say. I'm not just being biased, but they do everything in terms of keeping the building in the best condition, keeping our clients the happiest that they can be, and implementing change. I mean, recently the ops guys did a huge procurement exercise, and this exercise we've done before, and it's mainly been about finding the best value. Whereas this time it was about finding suppliers with the best value and finding the suppliers with the best sustainability credentials and that are in line with our policy. And we have done some amazing swaps. We have long-standing suppliers, and that's really important as well for me, I think.
Pressing them to change.
Yeah, exactly. Because they've been with us since the beginning, quite a lot of them one-man bands, and you have to nurture those relationships. But then, you know, we've done some really great swaps to some much eco-friendlier kind of things. I mean, we now supply Blue water, and that, I mean, when I met the guys over at Blue, I was just blown away by them. I mean, not only is it glass, recyclable bottles, but they're a social enterprise. So all of their profits go to Water Aid, which I think is just fantastic. And in, you know, doing those kind of procurement exercises is where you can really dig in and find out about other companies that you're using. So, yeah. Okay,
so just here though.
Yeah.
Back to the team for a second. Sorry. Just so if I was to come in as a visitor, obviously there's people there to greet me. What is the structure though? Is there two people that deal with I'm trying to work out the numbers of people here and what they all do, and whether they've got you have a specific person doing building management, or actually they blend more together?
So you have the operations manager in each building that really does take the lead on the building management, as in facilities wise, but the general manager is overseeing everything. And then other than that, you have the receptionist and meeting and conferencing person. So small teams, which again is great for us, but because they're able to really have involvement, they're cross skills and they're really helping each other out, and they're, you know, really tight knit teams. And the thing is, because they're crossing skills, somebody wants to go on a holiday, the police doesn't stop. Right? Exactly. And it also creates a great thing. I think we've got a really long tenure for staff, obviously me being one of them, but I mean we do, and I think there's lots of reasons around that. I think it is just a wonderful company to work for, but it is also that room for progression. I mean, we create those opportunities for the staff, we give them the training and development they need, and there's, you know, regularly we're promoting people and sending out the big congratulation emails. So
good, and congratulations on the Sunday Times listing as well.
Yes.
Right, so let's just go back to the start here about some of the low-hanging fruit. If you're a listener to this and you've maybe just getting started in commercial properties, and you're, you know, there's a lot of plates to spin. Finance, finding customers, making sure you're understanding the market, all the different things. And ESG is popped on top along with tax burdens and everything else. And it may not be a high priority. But clearly, in your market space, if you didn't have these policies in place, there would be some customers not coming through the door. And maybe in 2 years' time or a year's time, if there isn't progress, again, those customers might not be coming through the door. But if you're just starting out, what are maybe one or two recommendations you could give to someone to get started, to maybe that might have an impact, something they can actually do now that's going to make an impact, rather than perhaps something that's, 10 years down the line, we're going to do this and this.
Yeah.
Just some things that maybe you guys have done. You just thought, that was an easy win.
Yeah. I think keep it simple at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So first thing, I guess, if you're buying a building, know what the EPC is, know what the EPC rating is. And from there, if it's not good enough, that's where you need to start out, because it needs to be, because of regulations, but also that really is going to be your core foundation for creating an efficient building. And then I guess from there, it's analyze, know the building, analyze the building. Energy audits are great for that. Really, really good. And then from there, set out your priorities as to where you need to be spending money, at least setting out, even if it's in 5 years' time, you're doing X, or in a year's time, you're doing X. A big low-hanging fruit one is the programming of the building. Don't have heating running 24/7 if you're not operational 24/7, things like that. So I think start there, analysis, that's the main thing, because then from there, you build from that. Not all buildings are the same. We've had, for example, Blackfriars, it's a much newer building, so there's a lot less that needed to be done in terms of the improvement plans, whereas our building in New Broad Street, we bought 10 years ago, so there was more we needed to put into our improvement plans.
Yeah. So making sure you understand what you're getting into.
Yes.
To start with.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything in terms of physical changes you've done? I mean, it may well you've done them over several years. Oh,
we've done lots. So we've changed windows, changed all lighting, we've changed plant to newer plant. There's lots of things that have either needed to be done or we felt we should do, because as well, we're a fully serviced building. We want it to look as nice as it, not just for our sake, it's for the client's sake as well. But that's my biggest advice, is just know what you're working with first.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the advisors you've brought in, what is the organisation you've mentioned a couple of times?
Well, we started off initially with Savills, so who did all of our BREEAM in use assessments, and that BREEAM in use, it is great. I mean, it's a long, hard process, and there's so much data that you have to give, but there's a reason for it. It's thorough, and you can really create great improvement plans from it. And then our new is Planet Mark, our new partnership, and that's because we wanted to really learn about our carbon measurement. So that was kind of our biggest one. Great.
Okay. Right. So I want to ask another question about you. So you've been here for 11 years. 12 years, sorry. Good Lord. When you first came into the business, was it specifically because it was a serviced office market? Was it actually just that's what it ended up being? I'm just interested, I'm curious to know that to stick around for that length of time, clearly you've been engaged, but actually when you came into the industry, what did you come from and what was your expectation?
So I didn't come into it because of the industry. Yeah. I think the industry was very different 12 years ago as well. There was not many flexible office providers in London. Now there's so many. In all honesty, I wanted a job in London, working for a good company, and I met Niki and Giles, and they were the ones that I bought into. I think when the owners of the business are that involved, and they have just this wonderful kind of, you've met them, like they've got wonderful personalities, but also like really great values. That's what I bought into. And obviously it was right at the beginning. It wasn't like had no idea where it was going to go, but it's been amazing to go along the journey with them, opening new buildings, going through COVID, where it was all, doom and gloom, but it wasn't doom and gloom because we all had each other, we had the support, and we bounced back. I mean, I think it was a tricky time for everyone in the industry. But now it's bounced back, and it's kind of, in a way, done a good thing because people don't want to take out the big long leases anymore, and they need that flexibility. And we've garnered new clients and things like that.
Yeah, it's changed things a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So in the future, obviously you're really a big part of this business now. Mm-hmm. And Niki was talking about, potentially we obviously want to find more buildings and grow the business. What's your aspirations for the business? And there's two different parts to that, isn't there, really? And we're trying not to have them completely separate, but, ESG is obviously something you're very passionate about. Mm-hmm. And also the sustainability of the the business. Yeah. So what's your top things really you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Well, obviously growing the business would be great. And that's what we want to do, and get more buildings. But for me, the growth of the business means that we already have a great reputation in the industry, which has been built over the years. But it's being at the forefront, having that voice in the industry so that, people do copy us, but in a good way. It's one of those things, there's no competitiveness about ESG in my world. If everyone's sharing good practices, ultimately the real winner is, everyone. Yes. So that for me is kind of the main reason I want the business to grow. And I guess just being pioneers in that space. Being quite innovative, and I'm really lucky that I've got quite a lot of freedom. Sometimes things get batted away, of course, but I've got a lot of freedom to say, look, I really think this is a great idea. I really want to push forward with this, and they're open to it, and they say, yep, you do it. If you've decided that, then let's do it. So, yeah.
So just in that vein, maybe what we should do is to finish off by giving people the ability to actually follow what you guys are doing. And you say you're putting some of that information out there. So in the show notes, when we finish this, I'll put some links there, but maybe you could tell us some of the information or places people can find information about what you guys are doing about your ESG policies.
Well, everything's on our website,
right?
But also on our Instagram, we share everything, and LinkedIn. That's kind of where you can keep up to date with what we're doing, and also our newsletter. So we do send out a newsletter, and it's great. It's a fun newsletter. It's got lots of stuff around it, and then it has all things ESG that we're doing.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
great. Niki mentioned that as well. So we'll put that in the show notes so people can actually track how you're getting on.
Yes.
Give you some accountability, other than all the accountability you already have. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And for making me feel so welcome down here as well.
No, thank you for making me feel calm.
You've done a fab job. Right, okay, until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there, I hope you're enjoying the content delivered on the CPI podcast. Even though it's free to listen to, it actually takes quite a bit of time and financial commitment to deliver each and every episode. Did you know that by leaving a positive written review, you will have a direct impact on the visibility of the podcast? And that's really important, because by reaching a wider audience, it helps our team to continually improve the overall content that we deliver to you week after week. For some of you, leaving a review will be second nature, but for others, it might be a first one. Open your podcast app, pick the CPI podcast, and search for previous reviews. And on iTunes in particular, click to look at all of the reviews, and then you'll see an option to leave a written review. Go on, it'll only take 2 minutes, and it'll really make our day. And we genuinely read every single one of them.